All right. Okay. So this is the Kubernetes SIG Cloud Provider meeting bi-weekly on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So yeah, let's just jump straight into the agenda. First is by Jordan, fixing auto deletion of node objects corresponding to stopped instances. Is Jordan in this call?
Yep, I'm here. So this was an issue that was originally brought up around Amazon specifically, and then the OpenStack cloud provider kind of encountered it as well. Just to recap the issue for anyone who's not familiar with it, there are cloud provider methods for finding out instance information about nodes, and if that instance lookup reports that the instance does not exist, the node controller will delete the Kubernetes API node object because the instance doesn't exist. Some of the cloud providers will report stopped instances still exist. So in GCE, if you have an instance and you stop it, the cloud provider will still say, oh yeah, it still exists, don't delete it. And then later it can start back up and start reporting healthy again and get workloads scheduled to it. Other cloud providers like AWS and OpenStack say stopped instance does not exist, which means that any information on the node object gets lost. So labels, taints, any annotations, anything else that has been set on that object gets lost. So the question is, which is the correct behavior? Which do we want to converge to? And so we talked about this last week in SIG AWS, but I thought we'd talk about it here as well, just since this is kind of a cross-cloud question. The arguments for and against, I guess, deleting and not deleting. Deletion of the node object is losing data, and we've actually seen this in our setups where nodes got labeled and were distributing workloads, and then the deletion lost that information. So when the node started back up and re-registered itself, it was no longer represented in the correct topology. Additionally, if an administrator had tainted a node and was isolating it, deletion loses that taint information, and when it comes back up, it can get workloads on it that it should not get on it. So it's a data loss issue. The argument for deleting it was that in the process of shutting down and then starting back up, it could be shut down in order to have significant changes made to it. And when it starts back up, it doesn't bear much resemblance to the node it used to be. And so deleting it kind of wipes the slate clean and cleans out any corrupt resources or random things that are associated with it that you don't want to be reflected when it starts back up. I actually think that's racy. If you're counting on the node controller to delete the node object while your instance is shut down so that when it starts back up, it has a clean slate, that assumes that the node controller is always running and happens to pull your instance state while it is shut down. So I think depending on that for a clean slate is racy. And if we have problems, we need to fix those to report correctly when the kubelet comes back up. So I don't think that's a strong reason to continue deleting this. Anyway, I linked to kind of the main issue, and then there's a bunch of other issues, and then the last link is to a pull request that fixes the AWS implementation. And I think Angus had, who's one of the OpenStack folks, had a similar change ready. It was like a one-line change to remove the filter. But that is the issue, and I'll open up the floor for other people to weigh in, perspectives, opinions, other thoughts, things we should consider.
Yeah, I think a little while back we added the instance exists by provider ID, and I think the point, I don't remember exactly how that method came out, but one of the main points of the method was that the provider can tell the controller like it can tell a node if it can tell the controller if a node is shut down even if it's stopped based on whatever the provider wants to do. So like I guess my question is like, do we need to come up with one standard for like stopped instances are shut or are deleted or not, or can we just say like let the providers decide on their own because they have the methods to do that?
So a couple things there. The instance exists by ID is only used by the cloud node controller, not by the node lifecycle controller.
Okay.
So even within the controller managers, there's inconsistency about which methods are called. That'll probably wash out once we collapse onto one of those. But I think it's important to define what the API means, because if we want the Kubernetes controllers to respond coherently across providers, I think it's important for it to be consistent.
Okay. Well, the other thing is we actually have an open issue right now. Right now there is a call from the node lifecycle controller to the cloud provider checking whether or not the node has gone away, but that call needs to be removed. Presumably that will have a corollary in the cloud node lifecycle system, but it can't live in the Kubernetes one forever because we've got to get rid of those cloud provider calls.
Yeah, it's still done by a controller, so a controller can be running outside of Kubernetes and be responsible for this cleanup. Oh,
agreed. And okay. I'm not trying to say that that's not true. I'm just saying that that is going to stop being from a centralized place. So we need to provide guidance.
Do we have all the information we need to bottom out on this conversation? I guess my question is, are there users who depend on node labels, for example, that is the same node, and that may be depending on both behaviors?
I think that's sort of hard to figure out because what you can do with node labels is like there's like the infinite amount of things that
there's no limit. Yeah.
I think the fact that anything depending on the deletion recreation is racy, makes me not like, even that's an unreliable thing to depend on, and we know it is because we would hit this like 30 to 40% of the time when we were cycling nodes and things.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one, Jordan. I mean, clearly, if you want to recreate, or if you want the behavior of it stopping and restarting, then don't delete, I think is clearly the correct answer.
Yeah.
We also had a conversation about trying to converge on a formal state machine across cloud providers at one point. We started that conversation about whether suspended is a real state or not, and whether we have just properties of nodes or whether there is a formal state machine, but I don't remember where we ended up on that. Anybody know?
I think Tim was against trying to represent like a full state machine, and more in favor of like, if this particular instance could come back, then don't say it doesn't exist just because it's suspended.
It's like available, but it's not.
Yeah, there's still like room for interpretation, like for various providers. So I think it is like I forget my terminology. You can stop it and then start it. I feel like I'm mixing that up, but there's two ways you can stop an instance. One where you can start it back up again, and the other where it's on its way out, like it's terminated, it's not coming back.
You can stop and terminate in Amazon, those two.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like, you know, that all of the between cloud provider implementation details, but also even just hypervisor details, the more you try to nail down these things, the more you're likely to leave someone out. So the simpler the model is, the better. But in terms of the behavior of whether the node should be, you know, marked as deleted or not, Is there a way for us to perhaps decide on, if we do decide on a behavior, is there a way to write a test so that we can start enforcing it across all the cloud providers, and send that as a signal that, this is actually how your implementation should behave, and do it in a testable way?
Without being able to exercise kind of all the instance states on the back end, I'm not sure how you'd drive that.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I think you'd need a lot of support from outside, from something like, I don't know, KubeADM or something like that. And even then, I think you're going to end up with a very flaky test.
Yeah, probably the best thing we could do is just write some comments in the interface, just to let people know like what it should be doing.
So I know there's a lot on the agenda, so I don't want to take up all the time, but if people, like I said, there are two cloud providers in particular, AWS and OpenStack, that have this issue today. The OpenStack maintainers are in favor of converging to what GCE and others do, which is leave these in place. The AWS maintainers were cautiously in favor, but weren't sure what the implications could be for things that were depending on the clean state. If you know of implications, please add them to the issues so we can be aware of them. But I would like to recommend we proceed with converging on not deleting these.
Okay. So should we, at least for the next step, should we add the instance exists by provider ID into node lifecycle controller? Because that's going to be important for checking if things are stopped or not, right?
I think part of this change should be to clarify the documentation on that interface, because right now it's not clear.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, cool. So I don't think any of the AWS folks are here, but I think we can sort of chat on the Slack channel and converge on something soon. Cool. Thanks, Jordan.
Yep.
I'll just write this. Oops. Okay, I'll do that later. Okay, so next is Cloud Controller Manager status and updates.
Yeah, I wanted to give the group a status update on different fronts that we've been making progress. First of all, the KEP proposal is out there. All the suggestions and comments have been incorporated to it. We didn't set a deadline, for this group to review it, but we are starting to think about that. So especially the representatives of the other providers, would be great if you haven't done, take a look. It's linked in the agenda.
And in fact, so we've folded in Andrew's feedback. Nick from Amazon or AWS was nice enough to actually send a PR on top of my PR, which we folded in with all of Amazon's feedback. And in fact, both we and AWS would really like to get this finalized this week. Nick specifically asked me to bring that up in the meeting for him.
Cool. I will review it again, and Chris and Fabio on the VMware side and the OpenStack side.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it.
On the code side, more concrete progress. We are doing good progress. Walter has a work in progress PR that has detected at least 12 points of dependencies that we still need to sort out and pull in order to move the code out from core. One of the things we are actively working on is the SSH channels as part of API machinery. That is something that we need to sort out as one of those dependencies. So, this is all leading, hopefully, when we can sort out all these dependencies and points of conflict to a PR to move all the code out. But working on that is not easy. I have some updates on other SIGs. SIG storage is also doing progress on the CSI interface, but they are kind of facing similar issues that we are facing, dependencies mostly. Last I heard, they were stuck on features. So but they are actively working on this. And the other SIG is SIG Node. There is a couple of things that needs to be removed as part of Node lifecycle controller. So it's under the radar. It's not a blocker yet because we still have to do a lot of work ourselves. But I'm, checking every week with them to make sure it doesn't get forgotten.
Do you have links to any of these issues? Like we have a link to the KEP, but you said that there was a work in progress pull request up there. Do you have links to these things to share in the document?
Some of them. The SSH tunnel one is that one's GKE side, so that's actually kind of on our side of the wall. But the rest of them, we should have links that we can share.
Yeah, I will update the agenda with the links.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for all the legwork reaching out to the other SIGs, Fede. That's as we get into the rubber meeting the road, that becomes more and more critical. So yes, thanks.
No problem.
Yeah, the sooner we converge that code to be better for us. Okay, so next one is mine. Last meeting, I mentioned a work in progress PR to push the responsibility of load balancer name generation to each provider. So this PR is pretty much ready for review. It's just pending review from someone on SIG network. I think Tim Hawkins said he's going to look into it. But pretty much, it'd be nice if every provider can give a thumbs up on this, because it is going to change the way we pass along like the provider name, the load balancer names for each of the providers. So pretty much what it's doing is it's adding a method get load balancer name to each provider, and then it just calls like a global method, which is the default, which is what we had before, which was the first 30 characters or something of the service UUID. So yeah, that's it. I just wanted to get it on everyone's radar and make sure everyone reviews it. That's it for that. And then Chris, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So the next two agenda items are related. They cover cloud provider and other documentation. I want to start by introducing Cody Clark, who I guess used to be an intern for Google and now is a full-time employee at Google. So everyone say hi to Cody. And there are a couple of issues. Earlier today, we had a meeting with SIG docs about the current status of some upstream documentation and plans for it. And so the first thing that we wanted to flag for you was updating this picking the right solution document. If you go to kubernetes.io/docs and you go to setup, it actually, the very first link it sends you to is this pick the right solution doc, which kind of tries to show you different ways that you can get started with Kubernetes, whether that's standing it up on your own or using an existing provider, or something in between. And they're looking at cleaning up these documents. And of course, this is going to have an impact on SIG Cloud Provider, because many of you are either providing services or either all-in-one solutions or installable solutions on your clouds that will be impacted in here. For this page in particular, and I think Cody can maybe expand on it a little bit more, is for a number of these solutions, they're looking at only linking out to, not hosting these documents within the Kubernetes.io website anymore, but linking out to providers and solutions that are certified Kubernetes solutions. So these are things that I wanted to make everybody aware of. Cody, is there anything that I missed there?
No, you basically got it. It's still a work in progress, and we're still in the planning phases, but I'll keep you guys up to date as I make these changes.
Yeah, and this is and one thing that we want to make sure is that we want to make sure that the SIG cloud provider has input into this, and so you should consider Cody as your point of contact within SIG docs if you have ideas or there are things that you see. You can also reach out to me, since I've been kind of working on the docs efforts, as a liaison also. But one of the things that we're actually asking for is volunteers from within the community, and particularly the cloud provider community, who will be able to take a look at some of the pull requests that Cody is going to be sending up and making comments about how it's going to impact them, so that we're getting a larger community feedback from the people who are actually going to be impacted by this.
Cool. Yeah, I think it'd be good if all the docs PR were just either tag SIG cloud provider or just like add it to the agenda, even though it's from previous meetings, just so we can reference back to them in the future.
Yeah.
I'm interested to learn how frequently this content is accessed, and in what ways, by what kinds of users. Do we have any of that data?
It's one of the pages that have the highest views, but it's also one of our highest bounce rates. I can dig more into the data, but that's kind of why we're looking at revamping this page.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a stale page and very much a grab bag of stuff.
It happens as things grow organically over time, but it would be interesting to understand who is the audience that we're really trying to serve with this content and make sure we're writing appropriately.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that we talked about too, was, a page like this is going to serve a number of different users. There are going to be people who are looking for solutions that are, they want to swipe a credit card and be able to have a Kubernetes endpoint and get started, to people who are going to be trying to set up, Kubernetes within their own organizations, all the way to, for internal consumptions, all the way to developers. And, one of the ideas that we talked about was starting, being more general and describing what's available. Like for example, if you're using an external cloud provider, there's going to be documentation that is consistent across all of the providers, and things that you have to do to be able to work with, say, Kubeadmin or one of the other installation tools, to be able to set up and run this provider code, and so that's that's going to be a place where that documentation is going to be excellent to be hosted within the Kubernetes organization, this higher level, getting people started down the path that they want to go down. But then as they get into more specific solutions, working with cloud provider to have that documentation be the responsibility of the maintainers of that, and to link out to it more, but to still provide a layer of consistency. So that was kind of the way that we were talking about this at a high level in the meeting we had earlier today, in terms of the organization.
That sounds great. Thanks for the update. And this seems like a great effort to undertake. It's a sprawling mess right now, so appreciate it.
And kind of moving on to the next topic. So I think it was last week, Nishi's KEP was merged. That describes more general documentation requirements for all of the cloud providers, and talking with Zach and Cody a little bit. Similarly, really the next step that we need to work out is providing solid, good documentation on how to, in general, load an external cloud provider. I know that that's something that we've been working on, but if we can kind of set that as one of our goals for one of the major deliverables that we can provide for SIG cloud provider, I think that would be very useful. So if there's anybody who's interested in working on that document and helping out with that, please add your name to the volunteer list, and we'll get started on that.
One conversation I'm eager to get started on related to that is where to find the binaries that a user needs to run Kubernetes in various environments. And I think that conversation will likely take quite a while to figure out, but we're no longer in the world where you can just take what is built in the open source Kubernetes project and run it on any one of the places where it will run. But you need other binaries that are provided externally. How and where do we validate those? Is there a central repository from which they can be pulled in a general generally consistent manner. So I proposed that for a conversation in the deep dive time in Shanghai, if anyone is going to be there. If we don't have a quorum, I think we need to start that conversation now too. Has someone already been thinking about that and working on it?
Not working on it, but I've seen the problem firsthand when we're working on getting the binary for the Auto-Tree cloud provider for vSphere, and we're basically just putting the stuff out on Dark Hub right now. But we really need to find a way to have like a blasted repository for those Docker images, because otherwise, just the Far West, everybody's going to do their own thing, and if we have something that is more structured, it's going to look much better for the end user. And at least we have a way to say, hey, this is the right place for you to go get Docker images for your cloud providers. If I recall correctly, I think OpenStack is somehow publishing these through a Vanity Link for their external provider. Dims was pretty involved in setting that up, and I can ask him what our solution has been.
Yeah, for context, I think this is one of many such issues we're going to have in this, as Kubernetes gets broken down into more and smaller components, and you need cloud provider binary and an ingress binary and
CSI.
This is going to become more and more of a challenge. So the conversation may start here and bleed into other areas too. It's not intended to displace other conversations if they're going on elsewhere, but if anyone is involved in other SIGs that are discussing this issue, please loop me in, because I'm interested in thinking about it.
I will be very happy if we could have, start a conversation like during the meetings, and maybe end up having a face-to-face and, nailing down all the things that we discuss and, create a document or create something out of that meeting.
Yeah, if you wanted to do this in Shanghai, I'm expecting to be there. In terms of other SIGs that might be facing that, it would seem like when the storage SIG goes out with out-of-tree CSI-related plugins, they're going to have something similar going on.
Yeah, I know that the Ingress folks are also working on a decoupled approach, and now there's an external add-on URL field that's being used for a couple of things. So add-ons are not always bundled into the Kubernetes version, so there's versioning issues and coordinated upgrades, and it becomes we don't have no problems, we just have different problems, and we should go into it with our eyes open. So
yeah, it seems tempting to think that maybe you could bundle all of these different things like storage, networking, along with the cloud provider, but in fact, I don't think it's necessarily that clean, because on vSphere, for example, you can host, and people do host, other distros than VMware ones, and people perhaps need to mix and match these various components, having the freedom to choose from a different menu item in each section.
yes, I think it's going to be fun to solve this one. Anyway, didn't mean to derail, just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting also to see what kind of infrastructure that Google can, or not Google, Ciencia can provide for some of these like hosting binaries and whatnot, because that will also affect like what process we want to put in place for this, right? How do we feel about maybe allocating 20 minutes in the next meeting to talk about this, and then we can open up the Google Doc to kind of brainstorm in the next 2 weeks about it?
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I think that was it on the agenda. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to bring up?
I just wanted to check in and see if there are any new members showing up to this meeting for the first time, if they wanted to introduce themselves.
I'm new. Let me turn on my camera here. Hi, my name is Wayne Warren. I work for Rackspace, and this is my first time at a SIG meeting, so thanks.
Welcome.
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 Hi all, Nishi here. Sorry, I was having some problems with my mic. I had a couple of questions to ask. I don't know if you guys have the answer, but in SIG AWS, we are working on a CSI driver for EBS. Today we host this in someone else's folder. We're thinking of moving it to SIG AWS. But I had questions around the volume controller, which is part of CCM today, and CSI driver. So essentially the volume controller, as I understand it, creates, deletes, attaches, and detaches volumes to nodes. And in the future, we are going to add CSI driver, and then all the PVs and PVCs will be attached to the driver. So the idea is to put all the logic associated with attachment and detachment of volumes into the CSI driver. And so the question is, does it change the volume controller model, or is it okay for us to isolate the logic in the CSI driver? Does anyone have any opinions on this, and has anyone thought about this at all?
There are people who have thought deeply about it. They're maybe not on this call. Saad Ali on our side, I think, is where I would start with that question. I don't know if you've already reached out. I think he's one of the leads.
Haven't reached out to him. Okay.
Storage.
I would definitely talk to SIG storage. We've talked a little bit to the SIG storage. I know in the migration period, part of the concept had been that things like GCE PD and AWS ECB would probably turn into wrappers around the CSI to allow backward compatibility and migration to be easy. But what the long-term volume controller plan is, yeah, you definitely want to talk to Saad.
Okay. Awesome.
The other,
I'll reach out to him.
Yeah, what
the
I
other
keep
thing to
hearing.
remember is that long-term, while CCM today lives in Kate's, it's eventually going to live in each cloud provider's repo.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily true that you have to have the same solution in your volume controller that each of the other cloud providers do.
Okay, that's a fair point. Okay, I'll also reach out to Saad then, because I don't understand the implications of isolating all the logic in the CSI driver versus maintaining it in as a volume controller. Probably a discussion might be useful with him. Thank you. The other question, sorry.
Sorry, Nishi, if you would just give a quick update in our next meeting of what you learned. There may be implications for other folks too, so I think there's interest here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, will do. The other question I had is linked to what Jago said about where you want to store the CCM binary. I'm trying to figure out how I can provide Amazon credits to different SIGs so they can utilize those credits for individual testing efforts. And it seems to be all over the place, and you might not have the right answer, but for end-to-end testing also, there will be a need for infrastructure. So is it going to be hosted out of SIG Cloud Provider, or will this need to go to SIG testing? It's kind of associated with the binary question, the location of the binary plus testing. So I'd really appreciate some thought on that as well.
I can give you some thoughts about that. There's Andrew Cutts from VMware is working with SIG testing to figure out a way to standardize some of the cloud provider testing facilities. There's nothing set in stone yet. It's just a discussion happening in SIG testing, but there's definitely something happening already. So you might want to reach out directly. I can give you the contacts. He's not in this call.
Yeah, can you repeat the name again, Fabio?
It's Andrew Cutts, K-U-T-Z.
Thank you. Yeah, that's it from me. Thank you.
Excellent.
Anyone else?
I think we got to the end.
Cool. See you guys in 2 weeks then.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, folks.
Bye.
Everybody.